I'd like to share a story with you about a small vacation I took with my daughter and my niece. I live in Pennsylvania, and we went to a water park, and we stayed in a hotel. We could have actually come home, but we decided to stay up in the Poconos. And while we were there, there seemed to be somebody following us around. I mean, I sort of caught on to this, but I didn't say a word because I didn't want to alarm these two young girls, both under the age of 13, to a possibility that we were being watched or followed. Now, there's something called gang stalking, which, if you've never heard of it, it's purposely done to confuse and upset and disarm and alarm a person for whatever reason. There could be many reasons that you're stating treasonous statements. You're making statements that the government does not agree with. You're not on board with the war. You believe 9/11 was an inside job. You're a quote-unquote conspiracy theorist. The list goes on, but there's many reasons for gang stalking, and basically this is what that was. And this particular day, we went to the water park. We got a parking space pretty close, and we got our stuff, and we walked up, and I noticed that there was three men who were, they had very dark hair and olive-colored skin, and their hair was kind of curly, and I just happened to notice them in passing. So while the girls were on this one particular ride, it's the lazy river or something, I sat down in the shade, and I noticed they sat very close to me. And that's when I first sort of picked up the fact that they were nearby. So I just watched, and of course I kept a close eye on the kids, and then they were finished with that ride, and they wanted to go to another ride, so of course I walked over with them, and I sat under a tree while they were on this slide ride. And they were having themselves a really good time, and everything was fine, but lo and behold, these three men, again, are very, very close to me, but there's no children with them. So it didn't appear to me as though they were there to take care of their children. It was more like I was being followed. Now, I'll get to something called, the word called paranoid. And a lot of people think, oh, you're paranoid, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're paranoid. I love the word paranoid. It's been hijacked, actually. The word paranoid, all it means is aware. It's an awareness. That is all the word paranoid, that's all that means, is you're aware. So calling me paranoid is probably a compliment at this point. So anyway, we went back to the hotel, and we went to a couple of flea markets. We had a good time, and then we ate at the restaurant. And lo and behold, one of the men is in the restaurant, and he's having a meal also. Not paying too much attention, but I am aware that he's there. And we went back to the room. The kids watched TV. I fell asleep. Next morning, very, very, very early, like 4 o'clock, I wake up to the smell of natural gas. And the room, which I thought was a room for people in the hotel, but it was actually a utility room, and there was a gas leak. So I went to the front desk, and I told them that there's a very strong smell of gas, and that it was giving me an excruciating headache. Long story short, they said, we'll take care of it, and of course they didn't. So the kids wake up, and they have a headache also. Well, breakfast, the continental breakfast started at 5 o'clock, 5 a.m., so we decided, let's go have some breakfast. Each of us took Tylenol, because that's how bad the headache was. And while we're eating breakfast, the same man who was having dinner, who was one of the same men at the water park, showed up at the breakfast table. Now, the two kids and I were seated at a table for 4. This man was seated at a table for 6, which is the table right next to our table. Now, the whole restaurant was completely available, so he didn't have to sit at that table. But what he did do was he opened his cell phone and he had it facing me. And I thought, okay, this is now getting odd. So I decided to keep an eye on him as he was on me. Normally for breakfast, I would only have something small, maybe a bowl of oatmeal or a bagel. Uh, and the kids ate, and they were finished eating. And I said, well, I'm going to stay here for a little bit. And I watched them go down the hall to the room. We weren't far from, the restaurant wasn't far from the room. So they went back to the room, and I sat back down at the table, and I picked up a newspaper, and I had it over my face as I was reading it. And I did this for a while, and then I went up and I got another bagel, and I mean, I completely overate, which is not my style at all. I don't like to eat too much food, especially in the morning. And the entire time I stayed, so did he. And I was waiting for him to leave. And at that point, I'm sure the waitress was wondering, why am I seated at this table for about approximately an hour? And I would go up and I'd get a small glass of orange juice, and then I'd get another coffee, and I was wasting food basically because I wasn't eating the whole thing. And the entire time he just sat there with his phone facing me, and he was just sitting doing nothing. He wasn't reading the paper or anything. Um, so the kids went when they went back to the room. I decided after about an hour and 15 minutes I would go back. And when I got up, I walked to the room, and as I went to close the door, lo and behold, this guy walks by. Uh, so I closed the door. The kids had fallen back to sleep. You can't smoke in the hotel. So I get my cigarettes and I go outside. I have my camera with me, and I take a picture. I take a couple of pictures, just random pictures. And one of the pictures I took were of some of the vehicles that were parked. This area was a very small parking lot, but there was a bigger parking lot behind the hotel. And one of the pictures that I got was of a white van, not actually a van, an SUV. And I didn't think much of it. I didn't get the license plate. I was just taking random pictures at the time, which is something I do. And, I let the kids sleep. I walked around a little bit. I went back in the room. I came back out. I had another cigarette and so on until about 8:30, 9 o'clock. And we went to a petting zoo, and we came back to the hotel, and we were going to get our stuff and leave, but they said that they still had a headache and they were still tired. So we laid back down and decided to take another nap. Checkout time at the hotel was 11 o'clock, and it was probably about 10 o'clock when we took a nap, and we didn't wake up until 2 o'clock when the maid actually opened the door. And surprisingly, we didn't get charged for the second day, because after 11 o'clock you would be. But the smell of natural gas was still permeating throughout that entire area, which took in the utility room, our room, and a washroom. So I said, let's get out of here. And it was time to go home anyway. So we drove home. We stopped. We got something to eat. And I'm noticing that there's this white vehicle behind us, and it's behind us for a very long time. And to make this story short, I got off at the exit at 1:15, which was the route, the highway route, and the exit was. But coincidentally, and here's where it gets interesting, this particular exit was also the exit for the state police, and it says that right on the exit. Well, I drove off the exit, and finally my niece and my daughter, who were in the back seat, I guess, were turning around or looking in the rearview mirrors, the side mirrors, and my daughter said, "Mom, somebody's following us." And I thought, wow, that's really amazing that, they picked up on this. And then my niece said, "They've been following us since we left the hotel." And so I didn't really say much. And so I pulled into the right-hand lane, which would have been the lane to pull into the state police barracks. And I just did that to see what would occur. And I was right to do that, because when I did, this white SUV sped up and made a U-turn on a highway, a 4-lane highway that had a barrier in the middle of it. And he drove over the barrier, and he screeched his tires as he did this, and went in the opposite direction. And it's just too bad that I wasn't filming at that moment in time. But the rest of the ride home, I didn't notice anything odd. And this is just part 1 of gang stalking, which I'll get to part 2. If you're interested, please go ahead and listen to part 2.